Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, archiving live tapes from your jam band's 1979 East Coast tour, or else a scrappy upstart, selling thumb drives with the live show board mix after your gig last Friday night, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the third Friday of December 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Angelo who drove one of those Range Rover Discoveries with LED lighting under the running boards, and who's always trying to sell you his mom's Midol pills that he claimed were MDMA. And old Angelo would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now. You guys, that's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in: hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music, and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com and try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live, I'm playing tunes, I'm taking questions in the live chat, I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a community over there, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over, be a part of it. That's the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head on over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. A subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would give the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time to do that. I really appreciate you. If you're not in a place where you can contribute that way, you could still help us out in a couple ways for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I hope you enjoy this week's show. Our guest this month began his musical journey in several cult favorite indie rock bands before finding his calling as a Grammy-nominated producer and songwriter. Brad Cook hails from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. He started out playing in DeArmond Edison, a band that notably included Justin Vernon of Bon Iver. From there, he continued on with his brother Phil Cook to form Megafaun, a hard touring outfit based out of Durham, North Carolina. Brad has served as producer for The War on Drugs, Bon Iver, Bruce Hornsby, American Aquarium, Ani DiFranco, and many others. Pitchfork has called him your favorite indie band's secret weapon. I've been a fan of Brad's work for many years, and it was a real pleasure to catch up with him on the phone last week and hear about his journey so far. Brad Cook, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. So many people start bands when they're in their early 20s, get things going. It's a fun memory for them. You started a band where not only are you still doing it here a couple decades later, but pretty much everyone in the band went on to do something pretty amazing with music. We're talking about DeArmond Edison here. Can you talk about those early days with that band and how you got started on this trip that you're still on now?
Yeah, it's funny, man. I mean, so we started playing music. Phil and Joe Westerland, who plays, off and on with a lot of bands around here, Watch House, formerly Mandolin Orange, and a number of different artists. We all started playing when we were 15, 16 years old. And boy, when we got together when we were kids, we were so excited about everything. And I think that's one of the threads that has kept us going to this day, is that despite Justin's success, despite anything else going on, I think internally we're all still really hungry and really curious. And there's so much potential, untapped potential in music still, that it's hard not to keep going. And I feel like we've been lucky because Justin's success afforded everyone maybe a little more opportunity in certain places to sustain that as long as we have,
It's so interesting, though, because that can go, when one person in a group sees an amazing amount of success, that doesn't always go great for everybody else. I mean, people are human. People get jealous. People, they might not take it the right way. How have you guys just been able to focus on the positive parts of it and stay focused and hungry the way that you just described?
Well, it wasn't always easy. I think when things first obviously took off for Justin, it was hard to reconcile that, we weren't part of that equation. And I think that was a really important lesson to learn, is that Justin was ready to do something different at a time that Phil and myself and Joe weren't necessarily. And I think a lot of trust and patience got us through that time. And, obviously it helped that Justin really leaned on his friends too. And we were all able to sort of just keep that going in a way that, once the waves and the storm kind of calmed down, it was really easy to sail. I think we all sort of had our footing then and knew how to work with each other, understood and appreciated and respected each other's workflow, and encouraged each other a lot too. I mean, that's part of it, is that we all still really encourage each other. From Phil, making his new record, I mean, that's something we're all peripherally in conversation with him about all the time, and how excited we are for him and how excited we are for, anything any of us do. That kind of stuff still matters when your friends see you in that way, and yes. I think that's been a part of us staying close, is that it's not competitive. We're all really happy for each other and really excited for each other.
How much of that kind of ethic do you think comes from the fact that you guys are all regionally from the same place?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot there. I mean, the Midwest, there is a Midwest work ethic. We all moved to North Carolina. This is funny, but almost everybody that we moved here with 8 people. Most of us got promotions at whatever our first job was very quickly because we all worked very hard. That's the only way I can explain it, is that we came down here and everyone told us to slow down, chill out, take it easy, take a button down. So yeah, there was a part of growing up in the Midwest where, we weren't farmers, but we certainly approached what we did with a commitment to craft, get up early and rehearse and do that 4 or 5 times a week sometimes.
And What do you think the Midwest, if that's how it affected you, work ethic wise or character wise, what do you think you took away from it specifically musically? Like, what did music look like for you growing up?
I love that we were pretty isolated in hindsight. Um, we had Minneapolis music, but there wasn't really we were long past the Replacements and Soul Asylum and all that stuff. And we knew we like started listening to the Replacements when we were like 19, 20.
Got it.
But, Minneapolis didn't really have a huge identity. Chicago had more going on with like Jim O'Rourke and Wilco, early Wilco stuff. We would catch wind of like the more experimental side of maybe what was going on in Chicago and be pretty inspired by that. Caliphone, bands like that. But more than anything, we were so isolated, we could kind of do whatever we wanted. And I think that's part of the process we all still have to this day, is
Yes.
that we're always sort of tinkering with whatever we have all the time.
In sort of a beneficially isolationist way.
Yeah. Like we only have these three. It's sort of like if you don't have this big budget for a film, you're going to start to lean on your imagination in a different way.
Yes.
And the functionality of the project. And I think for us, we were so far away from any type of real immediate influence that we really influenced each other in a way to just keep, like I would say like the technique, like the parts of Bon Iver, for example, that's probably the most visible version of what I'm about to say, is that like, you could call it experimental, but the roots in that process predate Bon Iver. In some ways we were putting things and hooking things up to things that weren't supposed to be hooked up for a long time and trying to see what we could do because we only had so much to work with.
Yes.
And I sort of think like that mentality of just like, don't just buy all the stuff. Don't just chase down all these specific things. Like be creative with what you have, I think is internally inside of all of us.
Well, and also, you grew up far away from anywhere where there would be a music business to speak of.
Yeah.
You didn't grow up in Los Angeles, New York, or Nashville. So it almost seems like in a way the business was either an afterthought or maybe not a thought at all when there's no one around you actually making their living that way.
No, I think you're right about that, Joe. I mean, out of all of us, I was the one that made an attempt to participate in the music business, and I got absolutely chewed up and spit out. So that wasn't. We had no immediate influence or understanding and I still really don't to this day of how the business side of this really works.
I don't think that many people in it do either.
Yeah,
Really
it is funny. Now that I make records pretty much full time, it's like I think about a lot how, and it's not wrong, but everybody that works on the other side of the record from the act of making it is really working in service of the capitalism of the project, of like, how do we promote, how do we sell? Almost every, your booking agent's selling something, your label's selling something, your publicist is selling something, and that's an important part. You want them to sell the thing you've made, but
Yes.
their point of view isn't necessarily coming or rooted in creativity. It's rooted in business.
Yeah. Yeah. And you wonder how much, I think about the time that I've been around and I look at people who have had these, you can't even call it success because it's beyond that. They make works of art that touch people around the world so deeply that it starts like a tidal wave. So I think of like Bon Iver, I think of Brandon Flowers from The Killers. And in both of those situations, you have two artists who were basically making art off the map, completely off the map, doing it their own way. And that's what starts a tidal wave. There would have been no one on the other side of the record who would have told them to make a record that way, the first one that they did.
Yeah.
And yet, I'm sure that there's a million people who Monday morning quarterback it afterwards and say, yeah, see, that's all you had to do was go to a cabin and make a record.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Joe. I think there's a lot of revisionist history in the music industry as well. But I think you're right. I mean, there's just two different energies. They're competing energies. I don't think, and we see it happen now with a lot of artists where like there's like a conflict between how you promote yourself and just that very word versus like the act of creation. And I think, when you think about creating something with the idea of selling it, it changes what you're creating.
Yes.
Inherently. And so, finding ways to, I think people need to do whatever they can to like find a creative space and preserve and sustain, artists. It's so invaluable. It's the most invaluable part of this whole culture we get to be a part of, is people are making stuff that is really resonant and really powerful. And, there's no other metric that you can really use to quantify that experience.
It's so strange because any other business that you would be in that would dovetail with, the buying and selling part of it, you really want to be tuned in to what your audience or what your consumers might want, right? Like, and you do market research and you try to figure it out. Music and art is almost exactly the opposite. Your audience doesn't know what they want until you provide it to them,
Yeah.
And the more that you chase what you think that they want, the more that they're turned off.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because it's also true of like, you don't necessarily know what you're trying to say until you make it. Sometimes as an artist, you don't go into a circumstance of the clear idea. You just know there's something you need to excavate. There's something you need to get out of yourself. You just might not totally have the way or the means to express it yet. And that's the act of like making and writing and recording music to me, is there's still discovery in that, I mean, sure, there's times where you can like imagine a song and go replicate what you're hearing maybe in your mind. I don't work that way, but I know there are people that can do that. But I think even in the act of like, when you go to therapy, you don't go to a therapist and tell them, exactly what's wrong with you. There's an active discovery of like reflection and like having these sort of larger perspectives or these larger intuitions pulled out of you and discussed. I think, I mean, that's the beauty of it too, is that no one really knows what we want or need in this exchange until it happens. And then hopefully if you've made something that resonates with you, you can turn it out and maybe it'll resonate with other people too,
to kind of go further with your analogy to therapy there, because, hey, I've been to therapy a time or two, look out.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting about that, any breakthroughs that you might have, once you kind of make that discovery, in retrospect, it seems completely obvious. And it's the same with drawing beautiful creative material out of yourself. Once you finish, the one song out of 1,000 that's actually beautiful, once you finish that, the song seems obvious. It seems like, well, anyone could have written that, but I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's a good point, Joe. I think you're right about that. It's part of the magic of creation, is that you have nothing and then you have something. And, there's that feeling of like, we've had these 12 notes for so long, and it's really a testament to the singularity of our individual voices and the individual voice and point of view and narrative, because the chords and the tech, like I joke with people all the time in the studio, but I'm not joking when I say it. I'm just like, the music's always easy. We can figure out how to, decorate what it is you're trying to say. We'll find the right outfit to send you out the door in, but like how you're trying to say what you're trying to say and the confidence to say what you're trying to say, like that's the part that comes with, it's just a different process. And I think that, of course, like once a pattern or a revelation is pointed out to you, it's always like, you slap your forehead and you're like, duh.
Yes.
But yeah, I ride for that part of it too, Joe, because I just feel like it is always simpler. It's never this big. The most exciting moments I've seen, if we're just coming back to music, when someone describes a song happening and they just fell out of them, like I've seen that happen so many times now, and those songs are generally some of people's best songs. And I think it's more about not being in your own way, and just a testament to like the process isn't labor intensive. It's about your relationship to yourself and like the barriers we put up against ourselves. That's intense,
Who have you worked with that you think is the best at remaining in that state of just being able to channel material like you just described?
That's a good question. Um, Emotionally, I'll stand by Justin for probably the rest of my life in some ways, in that, like, Justin is he's confident in his emotional vulnerability with that stuff. He can really just walk into a situation, and, like, if he's ready to create, we'll make songs pretty quickly. There were some songs on the last Bon Iver record that happened really within an hour. And there's like a lifetime of learned and like failed experimentation leading up to that hour, and a million other things. But, there's one day I can think of, one day where 3 songs for the record got written, and it took 3 years to write that record, and 3 songs happened in a day. And, like, when the variables are right, like, yeah, I would say Justin's one of them. A lot of the other, right, but Justin, lyrically is really from the heart too. He doesn't labor over his lyrics to the degree that other artists I work with do. Mm-hmm. He's very, he's, even though writing is reactionary and it's part of the process of, like, making up words and then kind of deciding what they mean later, and maybe refining some of that, but letting the actual act of creating those be part of it too. I think that's something that makes him move at a pretty good clip when he wants to.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Brad had to take some time away from music, or maybe more accurately put, the music business, to get some perspective and to make sure that this was still the path that he wanted to be on. Sometimes you have to accept that you could lose something before you can truly take ownership of it. And it sounds like that's what happened to him working in a chocolate factory in Durham, North Carolina. But since he's returned to music, he's done so with abandon, producing a multitude of records in the last 5 or 6 years. That time away gave him the ability to commit completely. And there's a wonderful poem by Charles Bukowski about complete commitment. It's entitled, Roll the Dice. If you're going to try it, go all the way. Otherwise, don't get into it. If you're going to try it, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind. Go all the way. It could mean not eating for 3 or 4 days. It could mean freezing on a park bench. It could mean jail, alcoholism. It could mean derision, mockery, isolation. The isolation is the gift. All the other is a test of your guts, how much you really want to do it. And you'll do it, against total rejection and the highest of odds. But it will be better than doing anything else you can think of. If you're going to try it, go all the way. There is no other feeling like it. You will be alone with the gods, and the nights will flame with fire. Do it, do it, do it, do it, all the way, all the way. You will ride death straight to hell, your perfect laughter the only good fight now. There's a part of your career that, as I was coming up to this interview, I was very interested in taking a look at, because I think this is where a lot of our listeners find themselves. I remember I was living in Austin, Texas, and I went to go see a Megaphone show, and you were playing a gig, and it was a great show, and I loved it. And then 5 years later, maybe not 5 years, but a space of time happens, and my buddy BJ from American Aquarium hits me up and is like, listen to this new record that Brad Cook produced. It was this amazing record of his that you produced. What happened in that 5-year span? You go from, hey, I'm a guy in a band, this is what I'm doing, we're touring the country, to you taking another artist's stuff and producing a record for them. Like, I feel like in that 5-year span where I didn't see anything creative that you did, you really kind of found your creative voice. How did that process work, and how did you find who you were supposed to be there?
It's a good question, Joe. So I can definitely speak to, like, there was a moment in time at the very end of Megaphone where I think I love, there are parts of traveling with Phil and Joe and Nick that were so beautiful and powerful. But I think I was never my best self on the road. That starts there. Like, I really like a type of routine, and I also like, value creativity. Megaphone was an extremely experimental band, almost because we had to. We couldn't play the same set every night. I don't think any of us were quite wired for that. So, like, towards the end, I think I just felt like I started to feel like maybe there was other people that should have been on that stage, not me. Like, I wasn't present enough or intentional enough to be on the stage, and I should get out of there. And I took a year off of music entirely in 2012 and 13, about a year and a half. And I worked at a chocolate factory, just making bean to bar chocolate with a friend of mine. And I learned so much in that year and a half about myself and about just why I felt like I lost the plot. And I slowly started doing session work coming out of that year, but with the idea that, like, I might not do music anymore, and that was okay too. I was scared to step away, and having done that for this chocolate factory job, it, like, calmed that worry down. I was like, I could work a real job. This is cool.
Yes.
And then of all people, BJ Barham called me one day. I got a phone call. Let's see here. My brother had asked me to produce his solo record, Southland Mission. And the day we got to the studio to do that, Sharon Van Etten called me and asked me if I would tour with her, join her band. And then about a week later, BJ asked me if I'd produce his record. And all those things happened at once. And I was kind of like, whoa, what am I doing? And I ended up touring with Sharon and thinking maybe if I toured with someone else, that would be better. And I love Sharon, still one of my favorite people, musicians, singers in the world. But even that wasn't enough to keep me feeling good about being on the road. So I took that part of my life away. And then, BJ was like the first real opportunity of working with someone that I'd never worked with before. And I give him a lot of credit because he sort of put me in that spot, whether he realized it or not. And I've just been getting phone calls to produce records since, like, not necessarily because of BJ's, but, like, it never stopped after that. Like,
right.
I haven't asked anybody to work on their record. But I'm still working on records full time, So it kind of found me. I don't know. I guess.
What are some of those moments, though, that you learned in that year, just working at the chocolate factory? What are some of those things that you learned about yourself that you had to learn to be able to move on with music?
Well, fundamentally that, it's a hard, I think for a lot of bands, Megaphone size, club size bands, after, the the money becomes so, you're on a razor's edge of existence, and you want this thing so bad that it's hard to be patient with the type of success you want. And Megaphone didn't know what we wanted, so that's part of it. We didn't have like a big long vision. We were just we started as like our life raft after the Arm and Edison broke up. And so we would just make I think we were just forced to make money decisions. Like, we have to play this show, or we have to tour this much, or we have to do all these things because we go to Europe all the time because we were more successful in Europe. Well, 10 European tours in 3 years, you're pretty burnt out. And, it'd just be like a lot of stuff like that. We wouldn't see our families a lot, and we weren't really making enough money to be proud of what we were doing. We were making enough money to be like functional still. Like,
yeah.
And so I guess the Chocolate Factory fundamentally took that part of it away. Like, I still to this day won't make a decision in music based on money. I trust that the money will come with good work. I think if you do good work, you can sustain yourself. I try to believe in that. That's all I can control. But I know that transactional exchanges don't work. They don't work for me. And so that was a big one for me. That was a big like reset. And then I just think also recognizing how creativity, every industry, the Chocolate Factory has a mixing phase and a mastering phase. And, every industry has these analogs. And I started to really enjoy that more as inspiration. Like, if I want to think about how music works, I don't want to look at other music as the example. Do you know what I mean? I want to look at something else that frees up my imagination to find my own parallel or my own relationship to something, because the music thing can be pretty limiting, even referentially,
Yes.
And so that was a big one. And just working somewhere else after being so immersed in music for a long time, realizing, it's creativity exists everywhere. It's about the culture around it is really important.
Yes, indeed. So when you make that first record for BJ, like you said, it's the first one that you're working on with someone that you didn't really know or work with before. What was your kind of guiding philosophy going into how you produce a record for somebody else? Did you have one?
No. I mean, I'm sure I thought I did, but I think with American Aquarium, I remember thinking like, BJ sent me demos and I was like, I was genuinely impressed with the writing on Wolves. Wolves felt like, to me, it felt like a big step forward. That Wolves Rockingham era of BJ's writing felt like his sobriety. He started to like, it really showed an effort that I hadn't quite seen before. So first of all, I wanted to reflect that and center that as much as possible, but also BJ's voice. Like, we still joke about it, but for better or worse, I'm always trying to find the other voices of BJ that aren't the live voice. I love BJ's voice. It's so, it can go so many places. But because he plays live so much, it's really trained to go hard in this one direction.
Yeah.
And it's fun for me to explore the more tender parts of his voice, because there's so much character in his voice. And some of his writing, I think, works really well with sort of an underperformed vocal from him. I just think he can really, there's a lot of he's failed a lot. And I think he would own that as hard as anyone in the room, of like, he's really not afraid to try it and fail. And I ride for that energy so hard. But I think that's really it, is that like BJ was willing to go there. He was willing to step outside of his routine and his rhythm. And we just made a record 3 weeks ago, or a month ago. And, I'm always rooting for BJ. I'm always there for, the journey. I don't know.
In your mind, after you're coming up on, a decade of making records like this, in the most general sense, what is the job of a producer?
I love this because everyone I know has a different answer. I really do think of it as like, I think in our lifetime, it's taken on a lot of shapes. I don't see it as sometimes it's what am I trying to say? I see it as a very functional role. Like sometimes I don't play an instrument on a record. It's really like whatever the artist or record is asking me to do. I feel confident in my technical background to manifest any number of, sonic environments. But I just want to help them say what they're trying to say and reflect that as best as possible. And I love all kinds of music. It's easy for me to find umami and different textures and flavors from all, Megaphon trafficked in combining every kind of music we could find. And I like bringing that experience to it, but most of the time producing a record is just so simply helping an artist say what they're trying to say, the best that I can.
It's funny. I kind of hear a chocolate factory analogy there, whereas it seems like you kind of got the perspective of whatever happens, I got to turn these beans of chocolate into something inside of a wrapper that we can put out on a truck, right? And so there's got to be a lot of things that happen there. And it sounds like as a producer, it's like, well, whether I'm pushing the faders, whether I'm playing some bass, whether I'm playing a little bit of therapist to a songwriter, whether I'm running interference. I've had that before. Producer running interference with people on the business side. That's huge. You got to get those chocolate beans and turn them into chocolate bars, man. That's it.
Yeah. Like I'm just see it as like, oh, I got brought into the room. I'm part of the team here, and I'll do whatever I have to do to like accomplish the goal. I'm here to be a team player. I don't need to have all or any of the great ideas in the room. I just, if my top job is just wrangling all the best ideas from the room, that's it too. There's not really an ego involved in it because I just don't see it that way. I think it's when you're working with people you really respect and love, it's just a conversation, and you really just, again, it's all those things. It's therapy, it's taste, it's technical, it's interference. Interference is one of my favorite parts of the gig, dude. I mean,
that can be a really helpful one for artists, for sure.
I'll hold the wall back as hard as I need to for whoever, this is the space for them to feel like it's their creative safe space.
Yeah. I mean, anytime an artist can go back to who they're working with and just be like, I want to do it that way, but fucking Brad, he doesn't. It's funny. I can remember as a kid, at one point, my mom told me we were at a grocery store and it was busy. And she said, the way that a grocery store is run well, or the way that if there's a good manager at the grocery store is if when it's busy, they come down from the office and they start helping bag groceries at different lines. And it kind of sounds like that's your mentality there. But to be able to do that, that requires a fair amount of humility to come down out of the office and go, bag groceries. Is that always a character trait that you've had, or have you had to develop that over time?
It's something I always have to work on. But I think the natural act of wanting to help has been there the whole time. I mean, my brother and I were raised by a hospice nurse and a social worker for women, infants, and children. So we saw a lot of hard shit growing up in northern Wisconsin, unfortunately. And I think that informed a real conversation about how to help. And it's really rooted in that. Like I really ride hard for collective expression. I think there's room for leadership and visibility within collective expression. I don't think that takes away from anybody's desired celebrity, but I really believe that when we're working together, we can accomplish so much more. And it's, I just think communities are important. That kind of stuff is it is important. And so if you're top, it's like LeBron James has to go sit on the bench sometimes, like somebody, you can't all be doing it all the time. And again, I want to be coming down from the office. I want to be in the line bagging groceries, man. I'll bag groceries for anyone on that metaphor. Like if that's what the job is, I understand that can be really important sometimes to just keep in the flow and, helping keep somebody else's confidence in tune too. And I like an empowered environment. I love people to feel like they're hired because they're hired for being themselves. I try not to micromanage the musicians and the engineers I hire because I want them to feel like they got hired to be them too. And as long as we all understand that, then it makes everything easier. Everyone's empowered and everyone feels confident then once you're empowered to be right and wrong.
Yes. Yes.
That kind of stuff.
I can remember early on once a particularly good producer I worked with, we brought a musician in and we knew from the drop that it wasn't the right fit. And so instead of, like you said, micromanaging or going through all this stuff, we just let him play a couple takes, said, thank you very much, man. That worked out, and paid him, and he left. And because just the idea that you're going to bring someone in to do what is God-given and beautiful about them, and that you'd sit there and micromanage it. I mean, I just don't think you're going to be getting the best out of anybody at that point.
Yeah. I don't think so either. And it's cool. I mean, I remember hearing these anecdotes when we were younger about like how Duke Ellington would compose for his musicians. And I think about that a lot. Like, I use a lot of the same musicians on records, but mostly because we don't have to talk about anything. And I know my brother's going to turn up on a situation and just be present with the artist, because we're not going to get bogged down. We've spent 25 years talking about whether or not to hold a sustain pedal down on a piano when we're tracking. There's like all these dialogues that, Phil and I aren't going to have in front of anyone. It just makes everything feel that much easier too. And, but I love that part of it. There's musicians I'm so surprised by that. I would rather be surprised by something they did and work with that than tell them what to do. Yes. Just historically, that's always been the case, and it continues to be. I mean, I'll have my neighbor Matt McCon plays drums in a million bands. He plays on a lot of records I work on, and we just had a session last week where he was going to play drums over the session. We never even got to the drums because we made all the drums on a Soviet synth that he brought over that just seemed more exciting in the moment, and everyone was excited by it.
Yeah.
It was kind of like, all right, here we go. This is the drum image for the record or for these songs. And like, it sounds great. Yeah. And, Matt knows to bring stuff because he's done this enough times now with me where I'm going to ask him to just explore too. But stuff like that, you can't predict that. And I love that it contributed to the energy of the session. It was really fun. And it's cool. Let's do drums next time,
So that's a lot of thoughts on what the role and responsibility of the producer are. What, in your opinion, are the responsibilities that an artist brings to a session for them to be successful?
That's a great question, Joe. I would say that, I love when people are prepared, at least, having an idea of what they want or the songs. Like, I do love writing music, but I don't love writing music to save a record, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the part where I'm not. I would like to know that, like, okay, if we're going into this session, I would love to see all the songs there or as close as possible. And, the rest of it is just like trying as hard as you can to just tell it's not good advice necessarily. What I expect of an artist is for them to come properly with a vision and vulnerable. And just like know that things might change, be open, but like know that you're in charge. You're in charge of all this, and that like no matter how excited I am about an idea, you can say no.
Yes. And
it goes away. And like just that kind of confidence I would ask an artist to be, just trust your instincts and trust our relationship. I'm giving you permission to tell me I'm wrong as often as you want to. Please lean into that, and any other part of it we'll just figure out from there. But I don't have much expectation. I mean, it's their thing.
Right.
Right.
But that's the razor's edge that I think that this creative relationship always dances on top of, which is you're talking about, on the one hand, being vulnerable and open and to a certain degree trusting a producer, but at the same time having a very strong vision that will ultimately override. How do you put artists in a position where they can make those two opposite instincts balance one another and sort of end up in the proper balance?
I mean, it's funny, Joe. I don't know if I have an answer to that other than it's pretty much what I spend the whole session doing.
Right.
Is like, that'd be another way I would describe my job, is like, I'm also just really trying hard to, it's like, another analog I would give is, really good photographers, you forget they're in the room after a while.
Yeah.
They're really good ones. They know how to disarm you, and they're also not only are they disarming you, the secret is that they're disarming you and still somehow shooting photos the whole time that you're making eye contact with them and it doesn't look like anything's happening.
Yes.
And that's sort of the trick of it too, is that like, low key, there's like this constant back dialogue with the engineers I'm working with and myself about like how we're cataloging and keeping track of what's happening, because I shoot like a photographer. I'll track 12 hours of a day. Mm-hmm. I'll leave my Pro Tools rig running through whole hangs just because I don't want there to be any awareness of all of a sudden when you're messing around with something. I'll remember it and go back and find it later.
Yeah.
But like those kind of, it starts there, but it's just, I don't know. It's really just that. It's like trying not to talk about it too much and trying to talk about all these other things and trying to like, you're sort of having this conversation about what you're doing without actually doing it. And at the same time, you're doing it the whole time.
Yes.
It's strange, but
it is strange, but that's show business, baby.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I've always, like I said, I've been following your work in many different creative arenas for a long time. I've always admired it so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it, brother. Always great talking to you.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.